So our third learning unit is on the citric acid cycle. So remember, we learned about 4 major steps in carbohydrate metabolism. We've got glycolysis, and then we move into the mitochondria for the pyruvate dehydrogenase reaction and the citric acid cycle, both of which are covered in this learning unit. And then we have the electron transport chain followed by oxidative phosphorylation, which is covered in our next learning unit. So the citric acid cycle, again, beginning with pyruvate dehydrogenase reaction and then moving into the 8 steps of the citric acid cycle, really is the main point where we are kind of metabolizing all fuels. Remembering that whether it's carbohydrates, lipids, or proteins, all of those ultimately are funneled to acetyl-CoA in some way, shape, or form, and then acetyl-CoA is metabolized in the citric acid cycle. So we finally see where that carbon dioxide in our fuel equation is largely generated. In the citric acid cycle, we also harness and save most of that energy as reduced cofactors in our B vitamins, NADH from vitamin B3 and FADH2 from vitamin B2. And so we'll deal with kind of reconciling what those are worth in our electron transport chapter, but for right now we've just kind of harnessed and saved all of that energy. So things to think about from the citric acid cycle are the fact that this is a pathway that's cyclic, so we'll have different considerations when we think about regulation. And then there's lots of things that feed in or out of this pathway. Importantly, in our last learning unit, we talked about oxaloacetate, which is a metabolite produced in the citric acid cycle, but not siphoned off for gluconeogenesis. Rather, that metabolite is produced by another pathway for gluconeogenesis. However, enzymes like malate dehydrogenase might play roles in multiple pathways. So we've sort of talked about and begun to think about the interconnectedness of some of these metabolic pathways, and then started to discuss, well, what happens if 2 of these sort of systems need to be talking to one another? Do the enzymes sit close to one another in space? Do we have these metabolons that are formed? And the very last thing we sort of talked about in this chapter was reconciling something that I told you never happened, which was to convert fats into glucose. And truthfully, that is something that we are not able to do. We don't have the enzymatic machinery to do it, but organisms that contain the glyoxysome are able to do so. So things like plants and some bacteria are able to do really special chemistry to convert acetyl-CoA into glucose. So really neat chapter or learning unit on the citric acid cycle and kind of moving us forward to get to the last part of that central heart of fuel metabolism.